All right, let's dive into an absolutely epic story. We're going to journey through 2,000 years of history, all on one continent. It's a story packed with clashing empires, world changing ideas, and a couple of wars that, well, they nearly destroyed everything. And somehow, all of that led to one of the most ambitious peace projects ever attempted. So that's the big question, isn't it? How on earth did a continent that was basically defined by centuries of conflict manage to completely rewrite its own story? To even begin to understand that, we have to go way back, right back to the beginning. So where do we start? We've got to start with the empires that first hammered the continent into shape. They really laid the groundwork for absolutely everything that came after. You see, the foundations of Europe were laid in the ancient world. First, you had the Greek city-states, who came up with this really radical idea called democracy. Then, Rome came along and just scaled that ambition up, uniting the entire Mediterranean under a single law and language. When Rome finally fell, Europe kind of shattered into a million pieces. But that dream of unity, it never really died. Charlemagne's empire was the first huge attempt to put all those pieces back together. And in doing so, it set the stage for future nations like France and Germany. And while these huge empires were rising and falling, this new force exploded out of the north, the Vikings. Their longships were incredible pieces of tech. They weren't just for raiding, they were tools for trade and exploration that connected all these different parts of the continent. I mean, from England all the way to Sicily, they redrew the map and left a permanent mark on Europe's culture and, yeah, its DNA. So after the Middle Ages, something incredible happens. Europe gets a rebirth, what we call the Renaissance. It was sparked in these wealthy Italian city-states like Florence, and it was just this explosion of art, science, and thinking that looked all the way back to the glories of ancient Greece and Rome. And this wasn't just about painting pretty pictures. It fundamentally reshaped how Europeans saw the entire world and their place in it. So this cultural rebirth, it basically lit an intellectual fuse. It sparked these incredibly powerful new ideas and revolutions that would challenge the old order of kings and popes, reshaping the continent forever. And that fuse leads us right to the Age of Enlightenment. Thinkers all across the continent started to argue that human reason, logic and science, not just blind faith or old traditions, should be what guides society. They were pushing for these radical new ideas like individual liberty and scientific inquiry. It was a genuine revolution in how people thought. And this quote right here from the philosopher Rousseau, wow, it just perfectly captures the mood. It's a direct shot at the absolute power of monarchies. A quote like this lit a fire across Europe, fueling this massive demand for freedom and the right to govern oneself. And believe me, these ideas did not stay in books. No way. They exploded into action. The French Revolution toppled an ancient monarchy. Then Napoleon's wars just tore across the continent, completely redrawing the map. And at the exact same time, the Industrial Revolution was changing society from the ground up. It was this chaotic, revolutionary period that really forged the modern world of nations and industry that we know. But this new era of powerful industrial nations, it also had a really dark side. All that pride, all that competition, all that ambition, it was setting the stage for the single most destructive period in all of human history. And the first catastrophe was World War I. It was fueled by nationalism and all this new industrial might, and the scale of the slaughter was it was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The war shattered the old order of empires. The Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, the Russian, they all just collapsed. An entire generation was lost in the trenches. It's a cost that's almost impossible to comprehend, summed up by this one staggering number. In the aftermath, there was this desperate hope that this had been the war to end all wars. People truly believed that humanity could never, ever let a disaster like that happen again. But that hope, it would turn out to be tragically short-lived. That fragile hope was completely shattered just 2 decades later. Those lingering tensions just exploded into World War II, a global conflict that brought even greater destruction and the unimaginable horror of the Holocaust, Nazi Germany's systematic murder of 6 million Jews. By 1945, Europe was in absolute ruins. And you'd think, after all that devastation, Europe would finally find some unity, right? Well, no. Instead, it found a new, deep and ideological division that would split the continent in two for almost half a century. This was the Cold War. The continent was literally sliced down the middle. In the West, you had capitalist democracies aligned with the US under NATO. In the East, you had communist states under the thumb of the Soviet Union's Warsaw Pact. For almost 50 years, Europe was the central front in this incredibly tense global standoff, with the threat of nuclear war just hanging over everything. And this famous phrase, it really describes the reality perfectly. A fortified border, an iron curtain, snaked its way across Europe, physically separating families and entire ideologies. For decades, it seemed like this division was just going to be permanent. But while the East was locked behind that curtain, something absolutely incredible, a radical new idea, was starting to take shape in Western Europe. It was a project born directly out of the horrors of war, and it had a single, audacious goal: to make war between neighbors physically impossible. And this captures that founding ideal perfectly. The logic was so simple, but at the time it was totally radical. If historic enemies like France and Germany pooled their control over coal and steel, the actual raw materials you need to build tanks and guns, it would become physically impossible for them to fight each other ever again. It was just a brilliantly practical first step towards a lasting peace. And that first step sparked a chain reaction. The success they had with coal and steel led to a much broader European economic community, creating a common market. Then, over decades, this economic partnership just got deeper and deeper, eventually becoming the political one we know today as the European Union, even sharing a single currency, the euro. And you know what? The project's success was magnetic. From just the original 6 founding members, the Union grew dramatically. But the really big expansion came after the Cold War ended, when all these newly free nations from Eastern Europe joined, finally healing that deep division across the continent. Which brings us to today. What a journey, right? Europe has traveled from warring empires to a peaceful, maybe complicated, but peaceful union. It's a story of incredible transformation. But now, with all kinds of new challenges on the horizon, the question remains: what will be the next chapter in this continent's long and truly remarkable history?